You've been gardening all wrong, and it's costing you time, money, and a whole lot of frustration. From forgotten tricks that double your harvest to soil hacks that make plants thrive with half the effort, these game-changing tips will transform your vegetable garden. Get ready to wonder how you ever gardened without them. Now, burying fish scraps is a practice that literally goes back several centuries. It was most commonly used by indigenous people in the North Americas, and then later it was something that settlers started adopting. The idea here is basically that while decomposing, the nutrients that a fish's corpse releases are extremely essential to plants. They have stuff like calcium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, which are really vital for healthy leaf growth, better root development, stable flowering, and just a stronger plant all around. Why does this work though? I mean, sure, I just told you why, but what's really going on behind the scenes here? See, when the fish breaks down, it begins to release nutrients. This means it works like an extended-release fertilizer, all free from Mother Nature. This process also helps boost microbial activity, which means that whatever microbes the soil needs, it has a better chance of getting them. People would bury their fish 12 inches deep into the soil so that they were safe from local wildlife, pair it with compost, and use entire fish bodies instead of just a few parts. You had to really bury deep, because otherwise that smell would carry for miles and bring all sorts of rodents and pests to your crops. The next one is basically an old myth that's really a classic, but I'm not sure if it really works. It does definitely set you in a vibe, though. This time, the trick is to plant by the moon. And it was actually a really common idea for people to think that lunar phases had something to do with their crop health. I mean, today, people blame the activities of the moon for their doomed love life. So how much of a stretch is it to say your rice paddy didn't work out because of it? Lots of cultures had deities that worshipped the moon as a maternal, cultivating presence that was believed to help. In other places, the new moon to full moon waxing phase was believed to help above-the-ground crops like spinach and tomatoes, and it also was believed that plants retained water better during these times. While many gardeners swear by this, there hasn't been any real scientific research done into this subject to prove the effect of the moon on any kind of farming. Still, I'm not against anecdotal evidence. If your grandpa's grandpa did it, there's probably a reason. Plus, even if there isn't everything just a lot more scenic and climactic if you do it by the moon? I imagine a farming session at midnight probably feels therapeutic. Using milk for mildew control is actually one that's backed up by science, though. This was a really popular gardening hack, especially at curbing unwanted fungal growth, and this is because of a few reasons. So we all know that milk has protein in it, right? And if you didn't, then you might want to load up on a glass or two as a small little organic pre-workout. Anyway, it just so happens that when you expose milk to sunlight, the magical power of that big fiery ball helps to produce antimicrobial compounds that basically start to serve as a roadblock for mildew growth. Plus, the lactic acid bacteria that's present in milk also helps to control fungal spores and helps plants from contracting massive issues. Minerals that help to boost plant health and make them more resistant to different kinds of threats like diseases are also there, but there are a few downsides. The milk is prone to spoiling pretty quickly in the heat, while insects are attracted towards it as well. Plus, if spores are really your problem, you'd most likely be better off with a standard-issue chemical fungicide. This was more a rural trick for people who could not easily afford to go out and get milk, or for those who had their own cattle and had the milk to spare. Eggshell seed starters are essentially near perfect as biodegradable seed starting containers. They help more than you can possibly imagine by essentially helping to boost the calcium content in plants, which ends up preventing a lot of common issues you see with plantation. Blossom end rot, for one, is a common issue in tomatoes and peppers. It's a pretty common disorder you see in fruit, a brownish-blackish development or growth you begin to see towards the bottom base of the fruit. It's essentially entirely caused by a calcium deficiency, and stuff like eggshell seed starters can really help to take care of that unwanted issue. Besides just that, these seed starters are completely biodegradable. You put them in the soil as preventative medicine, and they break down and only help boost the plant further. They're also stupidly easy to just put in there. So lots of gardeners honestly just did this trick as often as they could. You had to be really careful about cracking the eggs near the top, though, and rinsing out the shells to let them dry properly. You had to fill the shells with a seed-starting mix and plant seeds and crush the shell once the seedlings had begun to sprout. You know, farming's a really delicate process. You have to have such a gentle touch with so many different types of things. Using newspapers as this really natural barrier to help suppress weed growth is a very time-tested gardening trick. It's one of the most affordable and biodegradable options you can go for, and most alternatives are plastic or fabric blockers that, while doing the job, also introduce a host of harmful little things that can tamper with the growth of your plant. Newspaper basically helps to block sunlight and retains the moisture of the soil, and since it breaks down over time and is cost-effective and eco-friendly, then it essentially means that this is free, better than anything on the market, and it doesn't mess with your plant at all. You would just need to put down around 5 sheets of newspaper over those pesky areas where weed tends to grow, overlap the edges, and wet the paper itself, and then cover it with straw or compost. You keep reapplying this whenever you need to, and you're essentially safe. Urine as a natural fertilizer is probably the most ancient technique across this entire list. It's also one that has an immense amount of scientific proof to help back it up. This is sterile, nutrient-rich and free, and it's high as the sky in everything a plant needs. Urine contains, well, urea. Who names these things? Anyway, the urea eventually breaks down into ammonia, and that helps to act as this really abundant source of nitrogen, which, as you know, really makes sure those leaves grow just the way they need to. Then, urine also has a decent amount of phosphorus and potassium, and it's also fast-acting, but you can't just zip down and start peeing on your tomato plant. You have to dilute it 1/10 with water, otherwise you would burn the plants, and it has to be fresh. It's best for leafy greens, and you're supposed to apply it directly to the soil. Also, this wasn't exactly the most popular trick. A lot of gardeners really looked at you funny for doing this. Apparently, there was a lot of social stigma, and I get it. Who would want to eat pissy cabbage? I mean, come on, there just has to be a better way. Wood ash for a soil boost helps because it's actually a really natural and organic source of potassium and lime. It helps to improve the fertility of the soil, and it's something that has been used in gardens for around centuries now, particularly in different kinds of areas with a high amount of acidic content. This is rich in a lot of the stuff we've been talking about so far, calcium, potassium, but it also helps to keep other sorts of saboteurs away from your crops. The wood ash is a natural repellent for slugs and snails because the dry texture of it really irritates them. They're soft insects, right? They can't stand rough textures. You basically sprinkle this really lightly around different kinds of plants and then mix the compost. It helps to raise the pH level, but raising it too much can essentially cause its own issues. Acid-loving plants like blueberries, for example, may not grow properly because of this, and the wood ash needs to be pure. It cannot be painted or treated wood, and it can't be charcoal. It has to be made of pure wood, which isn't always just, there. Three Sisters planting is a method that's been used by indigenous companions for centuries. It's a planting technique that actually makes use of some of their most widely planted crops too. Beans, squash, and corn work together, and each plant helps to serve a very specific purpose, which essentially creates this little organically sustained, automated ecosystem that boosts plant growth. Pretty neat, huh? So, how does all this work? The corn helps to work as a natural trellis that beans can use to climb, so it gives some much-needed vertical support to them throughout their growth. Think of it like a crutch. Now, on the other hand, beans help to fix all kinds of nitrogen, since legumes add that to the soil. Why does this matter? Well, you now effectively do not need fertilizer as often. Squash, on the other hand, helps to shade the soil and suppress weeds while also retaining moisture. So with just these 3 simple things, you've got yourself some pretty solid plant protection. It's honestly just like getting a good cleanser, moisturizer, and sunscreen, but for plants. The downsides of this is that it was something that was only applicable to larger garden beds, and not every farmer had that kind of space to work with. Plus, the corn has to be strong. If you happen to have a harvest full of weak corn, then it may just collapse instead of helping the beans climb. Molasses in the past weren't just used for syrups. Lots of practices thought they were a natural soil amendment, and they helped to feed beneficial microbes and basically boost overall plant health. It gave the crops a shot of a few things they really needed, like carbohydrates, trace minerals, organic compounds, and more. All of these things were really beneficial for the soil because they helped to really elevate microbial activity. You'd boost beneficial microbes because those were the ones you wanted to be attracting, and the sugar in molasses really did that. It also helped to make the soil stronger and gave it a lot of micronutrients it needed. Just a tablespoon or two of unsulfured molasses was enough to do the trick, but the downsides were that overuse wouldn't just have the opposite effect, i.e. promoting growth of microbes that you don't need, but it would also attract ants and other kinds of rodents and pests if you happen to spill it on the leaves. Now, this is a serious problem. You might think that it's just a spill, but that scent really carries, and if they do come and munch on your stuff while you're asleep, you're going to regret it badly. You know, I don't think the American people truly grasp just how much of a solid bro molasses they have been to us throughout the entirety of this country's tenured history. Baking soda was sometimes something people used to reduce the acidity of the soil, with the added belief that this helped to make tomatoes taste a lot sweeter by putting a soft cap on their acidity. Baking soda is an alkaline substance, after all. If the soil is far too acidic, it can help to adjust the pH level until it's suitable. Some gardeners really believed in lowering acidity, especially with tomatoes. They thought the technique essentially helped to produce sweeter tomatoes, but this isn't actually all that true. The sugar content in tomatoes is something that's decided mostly by watering habits and the variety, so this is definitely a case where nurture is more what the situation needs. Most gardeners did realize that this was not a substitute for fertilization and/or active care, though. It was just something they used to help give it a small band-aid fix, and it's not like they were dumping heaps of soda onto it. This one's a bit of a miss, more or less. It's a small fix, but it's also a bigger myth than anything else. I'm not really sure how I feel about baking soda going into my crops, though. I mean, you already hear way too much about all these microplastics taking over everything, right? Now, cinnamon for fungus control is a tried and tested old reliable that you can use without any worries. Cinnamon is essentially used as a natural antifungal in gardening, and it particularly is wonderful for seedlings and different kinds of soil-borne fungi. This is because, and get ready for this one, cinnamon has the chemical cinnamaldehyde. That just sounds too cute to be a chemical, sorry. It feels like if you sprinkle that on someone, they'd smell like warm, flowery detergent. Anyway, what it does do upon aforementioned sprinkling is help provide antifungal and antibacterial properties to the soil. This is because it starts to really block up those fungal spores. This works as well as standard fungicides, and it's completely natural. Whenever farmers had the chance to go for something that was totally natural, they always would. The only downside to this is that it doesn't do anything when an infection has already made a place for itself. Another side advantage of this is that it also worked wonderfully as a pest repellent, but again, moderation was the key here. Too much of this stuff could also help to attract pests thanks to the sweetness. Digging a trench for watering is a very ancient irrigation method that's worked not just for our valued American farmers, but pretty much every civilization that's ever relied on farming. That just happens to be all of them, by the way. A watering trench is dug alongside plants, and it has to be really shallow. This basically does one thing: it helps redirect water so it can effectively and efficiently reach the roots. If you've never seen a rice paddy field grow, this is something they very commonly do for it to help redirect sources of water towards the paddy. This helps to reduce wasted water, as the flow of it hits the roots directly and keeps them away from areas with high amounts of sun exposure, which is really not what they need at all. It also encourages deep root growth because the plants develop way stronger roots by reaching downwards for moisture. It helps to prevent runoff and erosion, and it's also just some fun work. It feels like you're really manipulating the land, you know? And it's not that hard. All you have to do is dig a trench that's about a few inches deep, 4 at best, really. Fill that with water and then soak it in the surrounding soil, and remember, this works best for tomatoes, corn, and deep-rooted crops in general. It's not ideal for shallow-rooted ones because they may be choked up by the water or just not have access to deep moisture to begin with. Rotten bananas for roses are a fertilizer trick that actually grew to be a really beloved and popular gardening hack. Bananas are something that are rich in potassium and phosphorus, and they help to really promote strong blooms and healthy roots. This is because they're high in all the goody good stuff we've been going over so far, while also being really fast at breaking down. Basically, this is nature's idea of giving your plants a fully organic pick-me-up. It's like caffeine for them, really. The only downside is that it can really draw in pests like fruit flies and ants on the surface. What farmers would do to get around that little disadvantage was they began to make banana tea by soaking the peels in water. They would do this for a few days and then use the liquid as a drench for the soil, and this would help ensure that no rodents were attracted. As good of a trick as this sounds, I'm just not sure. I think I like my bananas too much to spend them on crops. What about you? Would you ever try growing roses with rotten bananas? Or better yet, would you ever try giving someone roses grown by rotten bananas? I know I wouldn't. But hey, that would be a pretty nice little Valentine's gift, or at least a memorable story, right? Magnesium sulfate, or otherwise known as Epsom salt, was actually a really fantastic little gardening tool that helped boost magnesium levels exponentially. It was critical for photosynthesis and the overall state of the plant. And magnesium is something that plants desperately need. It basically helps them produce as much chlorophyll as they can safely pump out. And if you don't remember what chlorophyll is, it's just what makes plants green. It does more than, though, it's responsible for why they absorb light, as it helps to provide energy. So if something's boosting this, then it's essentially just providing a raw power upgrade to the plant. It doesn't just make the base of your crop stronger, it also really helps boost flower production and fruit production. Peppers are a crop that really rely on magnesium for blossoms and fruit set, and this also helps to prevent blossom end rot. While that's more an issue thanks to calcium, as we went over, this also helps give a small little protective edge. So all in all, Epsom salt's a real bro. Coffee grounds are one of the most effective and best natural soil amendments you can use for plants that are addicted to acid, and this is something that's highly recommended by lots of gardeners and farmers. When you have peer reviews going back a few centuries, I'm definitely more inclined to trust you. These are great for all kinds of different plants. To name a few, we have rhododendrons, which are just those flowering shrubs that you see on small trees. They're pink, thick, and spirally. The next are blueberries, which really don't need any introduction, and hydrangeas. These coffee grounds store a host of beneficial stuff in them, like organic matter, nitrogen, and different kinds of mineral residue that really helps improve soil health overall. It helps to add organic material, it helps to boost nitrogen and acidify the soil, and it helps not letting your coffee go to waste. If you might remember the Depression, then here's a little fact about it. Not only did people have their own backyard gardens known as victory gardens, but using coffee grounds and disposing of leftover grounds like this was actually an extremely common trick. Crushed oyster shells for calcium were really just nature's way of telling you that everything works out because Mother Nature has everything you need. They were such a natural source of calcium carbonate, and that helped to strengthen plant cell walls, which again gives them a stat boost across the board. Naturally, it would help prevent rot too. The real jump for joy aspect of this was the sheer abundance of oysters in America, though. It meant that coastal cities really had a good option for trade with other land-based settlements who needed things like oysters. Whether that was for eating or providing calcium support to their plants, that's between them and God. But either way, it was definitely a side hustle for oyster vendors back in the day. You also barely had to do anything to make this work. Crush the shells finely, mix it into the soil, top dress around the plant, and then just let them break down. You can add some compost so that the calcium slow releases and your plant gets more even calcium exposure. It did make your crops taste kind of briny, though. Burying a log under your garden bed is known as the hugelkultur method, and this is a centuries-old gardening technique that's been reused throughout many different civilizations. It essentially crosses a few things off of the checklist which are vital for sturdy, healthy, and good plant growth. Namely, It really helps to store moisture and just boost the fertility of the soil. Both of those can go a really long way in elevating the overall long-term health of the plant. In this method, you layer logs with branches, leaves, and soil to help create this buried bed that essentially just has to act like a sponge. The logs act as these reservoirs of water because they end up soaking all the rain and irrigation water, and as the log begins to decompose, it lets all that moisture it's kept for so long back into the soil, meaning you don't need to go out at 6 a.m. and start watering your plants. The nutrient release from the decomposition is also something that really matters a lot. As the log begins to break down, the fungi and microbes that break it down help to release different kinds of organic matter and minerals into the surrounding soil. While this doesn't sound like a lot on paper, in theory, it basically means an extended all-you-can-eat buffet for your plants for the next 2 or 3 years, however long it takes for that log to vanish completely. Now, I don't know about you, but if I could roid my plants up like that with just some branches, leaves, and wooden logs, I'd start practicing my deadlift and get to work on burying. Soap in the garden is something that people have been using as both pest control and as a natural repellent for deers. Its effectiveness really changes depending on the type of soap you have, though. Soap can work as an insecticidal soap spray that can really get rid of soft-bodied insects like aphids, spider mites, and whiteflies by basically eradicating their cell membranes. Insects tend to come with this natural waxy coating, and soap helps to dissolve that. They come with it because it's an evolutionary thing they developed for protection. Little did they know about this funny little thing we do with animal fat for personal hygiene. Anyway, you just need to mix 2 teaspoons of liquid dish soap, and it has to be the non-antibacterial and non-detergent kind for every quart of water. And then you just apply that on whatever area has pests every 5 to 7 days until your infestation is under control. Now, harsh soaps, like detergents and antibacterial ones, can actually really damage your plant and cause a bad case of leaf burn. It also won't help you get rid of insects that aren't soft bodies, and this needs to be applied rather frequently because it really tends to wash away. This one might really make you uncomfortable. Human or pet hair is something that's been used in gardens for a really long time as a repellent for all kinds of things. I seriously mean a wide array of citizens of the animal kingdom. We got rodents, rabbits, deers, insects, soft-bodied and hard, shelly ones alike, and bugs too. It repels all of them. It's like one of those 7-in-1 Axe products your boyfriend probably uses. It works by basically being a master manipulator and pulling a fast one on all the aforementioned animals. What it does is it releases human or animal scent, right? And if it's a pet like a dog, it works even better. This releases danger cues to herbivores and carnivores in the area, which essentially gives them a signal that, hey, this is someone's property, and that someone might even have a bow or a gun. They tend to not come near the area then. It's really just that simple, but it's smart because it takes advantage of animals' brains. Now, scent-based predators like deers and rabbits really fall for this one, but it even works on pests too. It's also an irritant for insects because they can get tangled in hair, especially if it's fine. Marigolds are widely used as a bit of a sidekick. Most farmers usually plant as side by side their main crops in vegetable Athens, and this is done to basically deter different kinds of pests. Their effectiveness varies on a few things though, and namely it changes from pest to pesto. They're really good at getting rid of soil-borne pests like nematodes. Marigolds release thiophenies, which helps to basically trap different kinds of root knot nematodes. These are just microscopic worms that basically damage plant roots really badly. And then you have French marigolds, who are one of the most effective ones at getting rid of just about anything, but they need to be planted a month before you main crops cash in. Marigolds have this extremely strong odor, which I'm sure made them an incredible joy to work with out of everything else. But this does confuse and deter aphids. It also gets rid of cabbage moths, which is a really handy bonus to using these things because I just can't oversell cabbage to you. Especially for farm hands, it was like the crop back in the day next to corn. Now, marigolds in general have an incredible boost to their overall effectiveness when they get interplanted with other kinds of vegetables. This is because the strong scent of them helps to mask the scent of the vegetables too. It also has the flip side bonus of not only doing away with all the harmful kinds of pests, but attracting the nice ones like ladybugs and hoverflies. If we do talk about what helps deter aphids, though, then aluminum foil is one of the best ones. Some gardeners actually really are fond of aluminum foil around plants or in the mulch because they believe it reflects sunlight and deters other kinds of pests too, not just aphids. This disorients different kinds of bugs like whiteflies or aphids by confusing them thanks to the reflective surface. It's so interesting the way people can make astute scientific observations through trial and error. Plus, ear and birds are a harmful problem for loads of crops. You find them feeding on the damn things all the time, and at some point, it becomes a real hassle. I mean, charity can only go so far, you know? The process to this is really easy. You wrap strips of foil around the plant base and mix small pieces of aluminum foil in the mulch. This really doesn't work if you use it for big infestations, though. It works as a preventative measure, but if the infestation is already set in place, then you're kind of out of luck, friend. Using worm castings is a technique that is known as vermicompost, and it's one of the best organic soil fixes you can apply to your crops. It's filled with different kinds of rich nutrients, helpful microbes, and organic matter, so essentially it works like a one-stop solution for all your plant health-related needs. It's high in phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen, and it's got an incredible amount of beneficial fungi that help break that organic matter down into nice little digestible chunks for you and yours. What this also does is essentially give your plants a nice little boost of growth hormones. Auxins, cytokinins, worm castings have things you've probably never even heard of before. They're packed with all kinds of bacteria, fungi, and other minerals and nutrients that help you essentially stay on the top of your gardening game. It also contains a lot of chitinous, which is an enzyme that really helps break down chitin. That's the main component that makes up the exoskeletons of insects, so they definitely don't want to spend any part of their day getting near this stuff. Growing potatoes in straws is a pretty nice and cost-effective way to save yourself some headaches. First off, it's just a method without any weed, so it eliminates any need for digging. It also dramatically boosts soil health, which, come on, when can we ever have enough soil health, right? Plus, the plants tend to grow and add on to each other, forming a barrier of roots that keeps harmful pollutants from interacting with the sensitive areas of the plants. So, instead of the typical method of burying potatoes in the soil, all you have to do is just lay seed potatoes, right? Firmly in the ground, and then once you've done that, all you have to do next is cover them with some straw nice and stealthily. Once the plants begin to grow, the straw actually encourages the formation and helps them to maintain structure. So, traditional hilling with soil basically doesn't do some of the wonderful stuff we've come to associate with straw-based potato growing. This method keeps the soil loose and full of air, so with all that ventilation and expansive space, the potatoes have a lot of room to grow freely. Plus, it reduces the risk of rot. You aren't dealing with heavy clay soils anymore that tend to trap in excessive amounts of moisture. Plus, now you don't have to dig, all you have to do is just collect your potatoes, and to do that, all you do is just yank the straw back. People use salt for cabbage worms, and they've been doing that for centuries. You might think it's a weird trick since what do cabbage worms, or any worms of any variety for that matter, have to do with salt, right? Well, cabbage worms are basically just the larvae of the cabbage white butterfly. These bad boys are some pretty destruction-oriented pests, namely in the way they chew through any kind of cabbage, broccoli, or kale. Gardeners use table salt or Epsom salt usually, but the method has some risks and also some limitations that you should be aware of before you try this with your green garden. See, while the salt does draw the moisture out of the soft-bodied bastards, it only works if it directly contacts the worms. And if you happen to miss them, you may need to use more salt. But wait, if you use too much, you can actually alter the pH in the environment. This draws out the moisture and damages the plants and soil, on top of potentially making your crops really bitter. So what farmers actually used to do back in the day was hand-pick cabbage worms and sprinkle a really small amount on them. They'd rinse the plants with water afterwards so that the salt buildup could wash away, or they would make an Epsom salt spray. This was basically just a tablespoon of Epsom salt, a gallon of water, and that's it. You'd mix that, spray it onto leaves, and then just throw it in plants. You wouldn't want to oversprinkle, but it worked more times than it didn't. Now this one's really going to blow your mind. Imagine a world where you can get monarch Alaska king crab for just 50 cents, or max $1. See, that's my kind of capitalism. These days you go out on a date, and the idea of either of you ordering the crab really sets your finances back for the remainder of the week. Back then, it was literally in abundance. I mean, you couldn't go a day without your friendly neighborhood fisherman catching a fat, juicy crab that was just begging to be boiled. Of course, that meant that canned crab was an idea that wasn't too far down the pipeline. It was made to preserve the sweetness we've come to love crab for, and it was used in all kinds of dishes. Crab casseroles, salads, as a dip, or even crab sandwiches. The options were pretty broad. I gotta say, it must have been easy to keep in shape when all the protein you could ever want is that easy to get. How about you? Think king crab something you'd fill your cabinets up with if you were born back in our parents' days? A golden rule passed down from grandmother to mother, and eventually to our generation, is that whenever you're cooking carbs like pasta or spaghetti noodles, you drizzle in a little olive oil. The trick here this time is that it prevents the noodles from sticking together, and we all like our noodles with extra twirling ability. Stacking up loads of pasta on a fork for a massive bite is one of the joys of pasta, to be honest, and that can only work if they are not all stuck together like somebody poured in hot glue. Olive oil can do literal wonders for this little problem that dominates most pasta-based dishes, and if you are new to it and want to make some killer Alfredo, remember to try this out. Salt is really good at quickly cleaning your iron pans. This happens for a few reasons, but two of them are that salt just happens to be inherently very abrasive, and it's also very good at degreasing. This helps food that's stuck on the pan and any grease that also won't go away to come off easily. You don't want to be damaging the surface of your pan after all. Why is salt like that though? Salt happens to be really coarse, and that makes it really good for situations where you would need an abrasive. Sprinkle just a little bit on a hot pan with a bit of leftover oil and start scrubbing with a cloth. You'll see the difference almost immediately, and that's all thanks to the coarseness of salt. Why does salt work as a degreaser? Well, that's because when you use it alongside heat, salt changes its properties a little, as most things do when they come into contact with heat. Now, salt can help to absorb and break down greasy surfaces because it helps draw that grease away. Salt has a lot of good absorption properties too. It's really good at taking away moisture from other liquids and oils. It's also good for preventing some rust, but that's a little side tip I'm including for free. As far as everyday meals go, it gets pretty hard to outdo candied carrots if you're a middle-class home in the mid-1900s. As I'm sure many of you can relate to today as well, the little goblin in your brain that demands a sugar rush every other day for comfort is something humans throughout time have experienced. How did they get their fix? Well, you couldn't just get a caramel mocha frap from Starbucks like today, but you could take some carrots, boil them, and coat them in a glaze that was made from honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, and butter. Not really something that would suit the tastes of today, right? But don't knock it until you try it, because it actually did really well. Candied food was this entire niche genre of cooking back then that got popular. The whole glaze aspect was something people loved applying to every dish to see what sticks. These were a side dish that also worked for kids, so they got a lot of mileage out of family gatherings and dinner parties. But even besides that, it's still a great way to work some carrots into your diet. As far as the taste goes, they definitely hit home. It feels like any other treat you'd be eating, though when we think of candy today, we might be more used to hard and mushy textures like in hard licorice or sour candies. This was tender though, and it would melt in your mouth. Here's a patty grilling technique endorsed by the culinary virtuoso himself, Gordon Ramsay. You get some nice beef patties perfectly shaped, seasoned, and ready to be slapped onto the grill for the most divine homemade burger you have had in the past 5 years. Turns out it was a bit too humid, the meat was a little dry, and the grilling took away all the moisture. You end up with a dry, chewy patty that does neither your teeth nor your taste buds any favors. So what's an honest burger lover to do? Put some ice cubes on that bad boy and let it grill. You will genuinely be shell-shocked at the results. The whole thing here is that it keeps that moisture locked into the patty, so the burger stays constantly juicy throughout the process from the moment you put it on the grill to the moment it hits your plate. It is not like you have anything to lose by trying except like 4 ice cubes, so give this a shot. And remember, you can always take Ramsay's word for it too. Cloth bags can actually help your cheese age just right. And I bet that sounds like a really weird mix to you, but it's as legitimate as a mix can be. The right conditions for aging all happen inside the wonderful confines of a cloth bag, so you have that for one. Basically, to age cheese and to age it properly, you need 3 different things. You need moisture that's regulated, and you need a lot of air circulation. None of that means anything if your environment isn't clean, so you need to be able to prevent contamination as well as you can. Moisture regulation is really important because as it keeps aging, then cheese starts losing moisture. Cloth bags, on the other hand, are made of really breathable material and help moisture to evaporate a bit more slowly so that the cheese doesn't get too dry. Cheese aging also helps keep air balanced since the cloth bag is really porous. All those tiny little openings help air to flow around the cheese, which you really need for the health of the rind. It helps for those helpful little bacteria and molds that you find on cheese to grow. Some of those microorganisms don't deserve to die in a heat death. They make your burger a lot better. Third of all, the bag itself just works as a natural barrier against any kind of dirty substance, insect, or material. All in all, you get a perfect vibe for your cheese. If we take a look at how Porcupine meatballs made their claim to fame, then the answer is pretty easy, my friend. You take canned food, a sauce that gets simplified for everyday use, and budget-friendly, high-quality meatballs, and you have an easy winner in the eyes of the people. This dish costs nothing to make and requires the simplest of things from you. It's probably all stuff you already have in your home, to be honest. How often do we really find ourselves without any onions or rice? The sauce might be a bit tricky if you're new to it, but any canned tomato sauce would work too. All in all, it's extremely beginner-friendly. It caught on because between the casseroles, the meatloafs, and the pot roasts, people needed something different, but similar enough that it could work for them on a daily basis. What they ended up finding was porcupine meatballs, among many things, but the recipe is largely forgotten nowadays. You just don't get to see it being made much in households, probably because the prices are much higher than they used to be, and because there's been a massive rise in takeout culture on top of it all. Its golden days in the 1950s and 1970s are ancient history now. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Feeling like your taste buds aren't being represented so far? Don't worry, we have a can for everyone, even the pickiest of eaters. This time around, we're going to talk about the miracle that is canned rice pudding. Sweet, creamy, and topped with just the perfect amount of cinnamon, vanilla, or nutmeg. This was the definition of a no-effort meal. I'm not joking around when I say all you needed to do was grab a spoon and rip that can open. As far as desserts went, it was pretty hard to compete with this 20-cent wonder and how much of a chokehold it had on the market. You could make more fancy desserts out of it, or you could just stick to the rice pudding, but for $1, you had pretty much your entire family fed. See, that's the economy we signed up for when we thought I'd grow up and get a job. I get that we can't print more money and all, but is bringing back affordable rice pudding too much to ask? Sometimes being a boomer doesn't sound so bad. What about you? Think you'd settle down in another era if you could savor all the food we don't have anymore? Speaking of turnoffs, something that detracts from all the maritime goodness fish has to offer is that offensive odor that tends to come with most seafood you will catch. Funnily enough, soaking your fish in milk can quickly eliminate that issue. Look, there is no easy way to say it. It stinks, and it stinks bad. It is not something you would want with your food, much less constantly oozing out of your fridge every time you open it. Grandmas did know that fish is too essential of a superfood to just cut out of the diets of growing healthy kids, though. Naturally, they did what they do best and scoured the ends of the culinary world looking for a way to solve the problem. The answer was always much closer to them than they would think, almost right under their nose. When you soak fish in milk for about 20 minutes, it bonds with the protein in the milk and the compounds in the fish responsible for that ghastly smell stick with the beverage afterwards. When you extract it, you get a clean-tasting fish with none of that ridiculous funk. Have you ever heard of turning a milk jar into a butter maker? I bet you haven't. because if I'm being totally honest with you, I didn't know either. Yet the process of churning really helps to keep the cream from separating from the fat that you find in the buttermilk. The milk jar, since it's a glass container with an airtight seal, can even help to churn the butter. I'll tell you why. Butter is made when you basically irritate heavy cream and violently shake it until the point that the cream starts to mix together and stick. Then, you take the liquid and separate it, and that is how you get buttermilk. Milk jars end up being the ideal choice for this because they can hold cream really well and also handle the amount of violent churning and shaking you need to really create the butter. The churning is what causes the cream to start turning into butter, and the tight seal really helps you keep the moisture you need to retain the texture. So, your pork cassoulet was what you went for as far as everyday meals go if you wanted to work some pork into the weekly diet. Pork cassoulet featured pork shoulders, or sausages in particular, and some of the typical ingredients you're used to seeing with savory dishes. Tomatoes, onions, garlic, all your usual suspects. Except this time it uses white beans like Great Northern beans. The reason you ended a crock pot, particularly for this, is that it is a stew, and the pork needs to be browned. Now you can include breadcrumbs for a crunch on top, but it kind of messes with the stew-centric vibe, so people used to leave them out. As far as the flavor goes, this is all savory, and it does not hide that fact from you at all. The slow cooking really lets everything combine into one massive profile that feels like it's made up of many different flavors, instead of a lot of tastes fighting for which one gets to stand out the most. When this was popular, pork was leagues more affordable than it is today, and the fact that you could either make this into a stew or a casserole meant that a lot of families found a lot of use for it. It fit the tastes of almost every prolific area in the country, like California, the Pacific, or the South, and it did great at keeping everyone full. Speaking of casserole, this one's a mouthful to say, but trust me, it's worth the effort. Neo-Life. Nest Dehydrated Stroganoff Casserole was this pre-made mix that just needed water added to it so you could get rid of that icky dehydration part of the whole deal. I get why they did it because canned food that can't last is like a fish that can't swim. Kind of redundant, so it's all right. Plus, this thing always gets a pass for how close it actually came to imitating the flavor of a real casserole made from scratch. You had a creamy, beefy stroganoff cassie, which you could obviously tell is processed, but for what it was worth, which was just $1 or $2, and the amount of value you got out of it, nobody was complaining about a little bit of a powdery aftertaste. Stroganoff is definitely something that was more popular in their time, though. Have you eaten much of it, or is it something you regularly get a plate of? Sometimes your fridge gets a due date for the scrapyard much earlier than it should. Sometimes the gas runs out and you are left debating a crisis. Do I let all my frozen stuff, my protein, and my milk go to waste? Or do I take some inspiration from my ancestors and try a neat little milk preservation hack? The next time you find yourself on the edge of a dairy disaster, try placing your bottled milk in a bowl of cold water. This next step is baby levels of difficulty. All you need is a wet cloth placed around the edges. Gets rid of those nasty bacteria, gets rid of your milk gone stale worries. We think it is an all-around win-win. Sprinkling flour on any kind of surface always helps with any kind of non-stick rolling. This is again another case of something being a natural barrier. The little barrier that sprinkling flour provides between the rolling pin and the surface of the dough does two important things for it. One, you reduce the overall friction, and two, you prevent the dough from sticking. Now, why does that happen? Well, dough, again, is made out of a lot of water, and that means it tends to become sticky when it gets rolled out. Flour, on the other hand, is really good at absorbing moisture. See, a lot of this is just pairing one thing up with something that's the opposite of what it is so that you can balance the side effects of using it. You use non-stick rolling for your dough, which naturally means you run into moisture issues. You use flour, which is really good at taking away moisture, with your dough that's producing too much. That barrier also works as a little powdery layer between the surface and the dough, and this really helps the dough not stick to the pan. Plus, this was a dish that really got the crowd singing, and that's always one you want to keep on your roster. This dish actually got popular for exactly the reasons you would think. Yes, Landing your man through a happy stomach is a good way to get married by fall season. Land your man, baked beans suddenly are a tried and tested method. I mean, you don't get a moniker like that for nothing, right? These typically get served as a topping for bratwurst or hot dogs, or served as a side for a main event that lies more on the barbecue side. The beans are made with ground beef, onions, and bell peppers, so they definitely are the perfect side to any kind of savory or tangy experience. One of the best sauces to use was Texas Pete sauce, but any kind of Tabasco works. If you have hardwood smoked bacon, though, that's definitely what cookbooks recommend, along with Taco Bell seasoning. As far as beans, any kind of canned beans work, but if you're looking for a specific recommendation that really encapsulates that mid-1900s flavor profile, then you should go for Bush's original baked beans. Either way, you're in for a great time with these. Try making them for a special someone on a romantic evening, and maybe you might get lucky in other ways too. If you do hear wedding bells because of this dish, know you did a great job. As goofy as this name sounds, and please bear with me because I really can't say Spork and Spiff without chuckling, it was actually a legit idea for an afternoon lunch. Before that though, let's get into what it is. Spork is basically just canned processed pork, and beef is exactly the same. But beef? I want whoever named these to win some kind of award. I'm not even sure if there's a category for best product names out there, but if there is, this guy should win. Luckily for this, the name wasn't the only thing it had going for it. It was really a lot like Spam, and it was affordable, easy to take around with you in your bag, and even easier to prepare since it was all pre-made. We're going to go into it in detail later, but this was really similar in texture and taste to Spam, just minus the tropical elements. It was a shelf staple. If you had a can of this and 2 slices of bread, you could pretty much make a sandwich today. See all those 10-step sandwich recipes on TikTok that ask you to go get a giant loaf of bread? Out with that, in with this. Bring back convenient sandwich making. Plus, Spiff and Spork were really good because they were so versatile. It was even a competitor to Spam because you could pretty much pair this with any classic breakfast or dish that was typical for Americans and get to eating. It was a great way to liven up some meals that were otherwise good but had gotten pretty monotonous thanks to being such regular mainstays at American tables. Spiff was definitely the better option for families though, since it was a mix of beef and pork sometimes as well. You could make some banger casseroles off of this. Now take me something that is ridiculously common in Southeast Asian households in America, but a little less known to natives of Uncle Sam's residence, is that rinsing your rice with water can do wonders for any dish. Literally, any dish that involves even the slightest hint of rice. This is because rinsing removes the extra starch packed into rice, giving you fluffier grains with minimal effort. If you are the type of person who enjoys their rice soft, airy, and mushy, then this is one kitchen hack you need to try. This time, you can thank brown grandmas for passing it on to the mainstream. Even culinary scientists like Matt Slem vouch for this, and just like with sticky pasta, nobody enjoys eating sticky rice. Baking soda is a renowned cleaner across the globe. Got cat piss on your bedsheet? Somebody puked because they couldn't handle their liquor? Just a bad day? Or was that burger not fresh enough? Whatever your stink-radiating issue is, baking soda is there to clean it, but why is it such a universal cleaner? I mean, what singles this one thing out as a cleaner that works in every situation when everything else has designated specialized things specifically built to clean it? This is because baking soda has all the properties you would need in a cleaner. It's only just slightly abrasive, and as we discussed with salt, that really helps in removing unwanted surfaces without causing any kind of bad damage. So that means all of your dirt, any unwanted stains, or just plain old grease buildup are all things baking soda excels at taking care of. The particles of soda are also pretty similar to salt in that they're also very coarse, and this helps clean grime too. Baking soda on top of this is ever so slightly alkaline too. It has a pH of around 9, and most common stains and issues you'll find in homes are pretty acidic. Things like baking soda help neutralize that by breaking down the oils in them, and that helps keep the stains away. It also helps take away the odors from any kind of spoiled food or excess waste too. Again, This is because these odors happen as a result of acid, and as we now know, baking soda is pretty good at canceling that out. So if you ever wanted to see an actual jack of all trades, here you go. Pre-freeze like cobbler? Then you need to hear about the wonderful blueberry ones everyone used to make in their crock-pots. It isn't really a secret that cobbler is an everyday dessert in most American households, and it's been that way for longer than either you or I have been around. It'll stay that way after everyone we know is gone too. Some things are just generational like that. Blueberry cobbler used to be made in crock-pots back then to really let it absorb the flavor. And since you could just leave the dessert to bask in the flavors on its own, people started making it so much more. After crock-pots went mainstream and most households had one, sales for lots of berries and fruits went up because of how easy it became to make desserts surrounding them. Blueberries definitely weren't an exception, and the best part was that you could make this at any time of the year, and it would still work. Like, you know how some people don't like having hot chocolate outside of winter? You'd never get any concerns like that with a blueberry cobbler. There was always someone ready to eat a whole plate. Now, who could ever forget Campbell's soup? This is a household staple if I've ever heard of one, and it's a pretty magical thing when you think about it from the boomer's perspective. Today, we're spoiled. Let's face it, we are. We walk up to a store and get anything we want packaged, canned, or frozen. But all these goodies started somewhere, and Campbell's Soup was one of the most popular and long-lasting brands to do it. It had this condensed soup that just needed water or milk added and came in accessible flavors like cream of mushroom, chicken noodle, and tomato. The range with this thing was insane. Did you know you could even use this soup as the base for a casserole or as its sauce? And all that for just 10 to 12 cents. Pretty good steal, right? Considering it wasn't just a meal, it was a lifesaver for busy moms and a comforting staple for families during tough times. The iconic red and white can became a symbol of good food, finding a place in nearly every pantry. Campbell's ads even taught clever recipes like turning cream of mushroom soup into a creamy pasta sauce or a gravy for meatloaf. This one is similarly another one you may have not only heard of, but seen, tried, and tested for yourself. Toasting spices in a pan can do wonders for their flavor. It is like steroids with athletes, except nothing about it messes up your system. Just a little bit of toasting can really bring out every last drop of flavor from whatever spices you are working with, and the end result you get is an explosively flavorful dish that packs thrice the punch you thought it would. Sounds like a pretty good deal this time too, right? Ever thought about why this happens though? You know how spices have these oils in them, and they are largely what is responsible for that banging taste we are all used to? Once you toast them, the heat starts to draw out those oils and it kind of puts them on turbo mode. Cumin gets more healthy, chilies are no longer just spicy enough to make your eyes water, but sweet and smoky too, and coriander really gets flavor. Vinegar acidic. And that's not new information. Hell, even a fifth grader these days can tell you that. At least I hope they can. Anyway, don't worry, because I'm here to tell you all about why its acidity is a factor we want to really be appreciating with this hack. See, that acidic nature helps to loosen and dissolve the burnt surface that you see on pans, the icky black stuff that sticks and just won't go away. Acetic acid is actually pretty weak, and vinegar doesn't exactly have the highest concentration of it, but its reaction with the minerals you'd find in burnt food and grease is what's interesting here. The acid actually helps break these down through an acid-base reaction and dissolution. Now those sound like fancy science words, but it basically means that this stuff is really good at helping the burnt food or grease detach from the surface of the pan. It's because vinegar is really good at cutting through stuff like that, which helps it dissolve greasy substances. I guess you can salvage that pan after all, right? We're going to continue the casserole show with Alpine chicken. This one got popular for more or less the same reasons the other two did. However, it had an extra kick that they didn't, and that was the addition of Swiss cheese. Americans will never get tired of a dish if it has a decent helping of cheese in it. So you shouldn't be too surprised that this is stuck in the minds of eaters and families like glue. Alpine chicken typically uses cream of mushroom soup and breadcrumbs or a stuffing mix layered in a dish that gets cooked until the cheese is melted. You also have your typical chicken breasts involved, but some people go for the thighs. It peaked in popularity during the post-war era when people really started looking for more ease in their cooking rather than sweating buckets after a day in the kitchen. You know how when you cook something, you rarely feel like eating it immediately? It's because cooking is a soul-sucking endeavor. It doesn't have to be, thanks to things like crock pots and recipes like Alpine chicken, which bring the fun back in food and make sure you actually get to rest and replenish that stamina tank. Deviled ham is pretty much exactly what you're used to seeing. The finest ham you've ever seen in a can, minced to perfection and blended with just the right amount of mustard, spices, and seasonings. You can make sandwiches out of this or use it as a spread, but beyond that, it's not really something you could do too much with it. It's one of those canned foods that doesn't really have much in terms of variety, but does excel at what it does, so we'll give it a pass. You could get it for 20 cents or just a few more, but if you really wanted ham heaven in a can, then the obvious pick was Underwood. This was arguably the most dominating brand and helped every grocery store drive its sales up for the month. Not to mention, it was responsible for a lot of ham sandwiches. People swore by its versatility, often packing it into school lunches or smearing it on crackers for an easy appetizer at home parties. Deviled ham's spicy kick gave it a unique edge, making it a favorite for picnics and road trips too. Housewives appreciated how long it lasted on the shelf, giving them a quick fix for surprise guests or after-school snacks. And who could forget the iconic devil logo on the packaging? It became a recognizable staple in American households, a small but satisfying indulgence that offered the flavor of home-cooked ham without all the effort. You know how boomers love a good low-effort food. Deviled ham may not have been the star of gourmet cuisine, but it was undeniably a reliable classic. Storing herbs in an ice cube tray works incredibly well because it really helps to keep them fresh, at least as fresh as they really can be. The herbs are very fragile, and if you've spent a lot of time seasoning your food, this isn't something I need to tell you. The essential oils in these are pretty much non-existent the moment they come into contact with air, and that only starts becoming more of a problem the longer that exposure lasts. They don't do well with lighter heat either, which is why an ice cube tray works for 3 reasons. 1, it helps preserve their freshness. Okay, tell me why, right? Well, ice cube trays put a little roadblock in a neat and slightly annoying process I affectionately call oxidation, and that really helps to keep spoilage issues low. That's all thanks to the cold temperature helping the enzymes stay away from the tissues of the herbs, and in turn, the oils that are with them. 2, there's only so much space in a tray, so you only take out the amount of herbs you need, which helps you keep spoilage to a low anyway. 3rd, you always place these trays in freezers, away from any kind of light or heat, which gives the herbs the perfect environment they need to rest and chill until you need to take them out. Osobuco is something that's known for smoothness. The way the meat falls off of the bone, the saltiness of the gremolata, the freshness of that first bite, which is an experience that you have to savor all on its own. If you're like one of those people who loves to try out your local Italian-American cuisine, you'd be doing yourself one hell of an injustice by not ever trying this. The way this dish got popular was because while the dish was originally made only with veal, by the time it hit American soil, it was using substitutes like beef or pork shanks. This made the dish accessible for your everyday Joe who can't afford to spend a lot on vegetables because, bills. Plus, if you add some gremolata, which is a mix of lemon zest, garlic, and parsley, to the dish, then you get a pretty balanced set of flavors that bounce off of each other. This is one of the finest parts of Italian-American cuisine, and it got popular for being a wonderful family meal that can keep everyone content and full. So you could not finish up all your pizza in one go, but you bet the gang that you needed an entire large one to yourself. It happens to the best of us, but do not let overestimation trap you into forcefully eating soggy leftover pizza. Reheat it in a skillet and get that crust crispy, fresh, and warm, all in one go. Just because something is a leftover does not mean you have to completely sacrifice the original quality You can still get a lot of bang for your buck if you take the time to heat it the old-fashioned way. We know microwaves are convenient, almost dangerously so, but they cannot do everything that gas-based fire and kitchen utensils can. So if you really do not feel like sitting through mushy, soggy pizza crusts, you know what to do now. That wraps up the list of forgotten vegetable gardening hacks that everyone should bring back. Comment your favorite hack and don't forget to like and subscribe.